Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR. I'm George Binns, and we're continuing our series of discussions about the state of the city with who else knows it better but the president of the City Council, Julie Flowers. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you, George. Thanks for having me back. Happy New Year.
Yeah, and we've gotten through the swearing-in ceremony for this City Council and the school committee. Everybody's up and running, I guess, and immediately get hit with a major challenge. What are we going to do about the budget for 27?
You're right. It really just starts off, this term is starting off right in the thick of it.
Yeah.
I think fortunately for city councilors and school committee members who were serving in the last term, or, I would say everybody who is running, because people were very engaged, very informed. It is in the thick of it, but it's not a surprise because, as you know, you and I talked a bit about this in the last term.
Yeah.
That doing the FY26 budget, we knew that FY27 was going to present a challenge, and really the start of a challenge, because FY27 represents a challenging year in terms of revenues keeping pace with expenses.
Yeah.
But the years right beyond it are likely to also represent that kind of a challenge.
Yeah, it's going to be an ongoing problem.
Yes. So the good news is when you know that it's coming, you're not caught off guard, and we have this time to be able to do some thinking and working and planning on it. But you're not wrong to say that it represents a true challenge, and we will have to make decisions as a community about the things that we want to perhaps do to meet some of those revenue needs, or the things that we may need to cut back on, which is always hard. We never want to reduce services, and I mean, for municipalities, of course, cutting budgets really equates to cutting services.
Well, a municipality is nothing but a service industry.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of different services you don't think about, but you get into the situation where they're scattered all over the city and you don't notice that they're around. And at the same time, the mayor's got a plan. He wants to get everybody back in City Hall and do a major renovation, and you got hit with the, was it 25 million and change?
For the project.
For the project.
Yeah.
And we still got the $7.3 to $8 million buyout of the dollar store that's got to be financed. So right off the bat, we're just adding more to the challenge, as well as the concerns about salaries going forward, because that's the big driver on the budget. Is we got a settlement, but it's got escalation clauses built in, so that keeps getting bigger. So where can you cut back?
It's a good question. Thinking about the City Hall project, you're right, that sort of came right away at the first meeting that it was filed from the administration. Again, fortunately, I would say, that is a project that we have been receiving updates about, had some information that it was coming. I know you and I have sort of chatted about it being in the pipeline. It's one where I definitely think it represents the first of what will be many challenges, because it also presents a real need. City Hall itself is a piece of city infrastructure, it's an asset, and so part of our obligation as a city is to make sure that the infrastructure and the assets that we hold are maintained, because you can imagine, letting something go, whether it be a school or whether it be City Hall, indefinitely, or the police station, which the old police station is a good example of this.
Yeah.
You end up in a situation where the cost to repair or replace is much higher than it would have been. So we've got these obligations also to manage all of those assets of the city well. And there is a really strong, I think, sense that you can also think about managing budget debt, managing these debt pieces into our budget for some of these bigger projects. Although it feels counterintuitive. It feels counterintuitive to me too, and when I look at it on paper initially, if we're in a tight spot, when we're in a tight spot in our personal budgets, what's the first thing you want to do is you want to reduce spending.
Yeah.
And that is going to be a piece of the conversation, there's no doubt. And for a municipality, cutting back on some of these big projects effectively drops the line item in our budget that is debt management. And the debt management line item being there allows us to layer in some of these projects in a responsible way. So managing debt and actually having some of it at a certain percentage, you don't want it to be an overly large percentage
Yeah.
of a municipal budget, actually becomes an important part of good municipal budget management. And I know that sounds a little counterintuitive. So I'll be really looking forward to this conversation at the City Council about the City Hall project to see how it really slots into that plan, which has allowed us to do some of the projects we've done in the past. Managing our debt well has allowed us to do things like build new schools and build the police station and do it in the way that's most cost effective for the taxpayer. So I think it will be a really good conversation. There are 2 public hearings coming up on the 20th on this topic. I know you know that because you follow along. And if folks are interested, I would encourage them to watch on BevCam or to join us in the chamber on the 20th.
Yeah, so it gets to be a significant part of the budget. And I think
Yes.
you read all over the place about credit card debt is going out of sight for lots of people. So
Yes.
it's not a unique problem for the city of Beverly. But at the same time, like you said, the first thing you want to do is think, can we delay it? Can we do something different?
Yeah.
And I would like to feel more confident about the project if I knew that all the options were explored. For instance, could we rent property someplace? We're going to go through that exercise to rent some space or to create some
Temporarily, yep.
space for the city facilities while the building's being renovated. And that was the whole idea behind buying the dollar store and
Yes.
that thing. Well, that was one of the ingredients, and there's a lot of more of them. But that was still an option. That's something that still has to be done. And in the writings I've seen in the paper so far, nobody's mentioned, though, what are we going to do about the people while we're renovating? Since the dollar store is obviously out, it was a problem with asbestos, I guess it was.
So some of the costs to rehab it, even for temporary use, in the end, that calculation did not make sense. So you're right. Putting a bid out, a request for proposals on the dollar store, there's been some community conversations to get feedback from members of the community about what they'd love to see or what could be part of an RFP for the dollar store.
Yeah.
But that's one of the moving parts I'd like to see us act on. I think we do need to make a decision, put out a request for proposal on the dollar store so that we can move it, off the city's list of assets, things that we own,
Yeah.
and move forward with that project. I think you're right to say that's one of the moving parts here. That's important.
Well, it's a major ingredient of it because, as I understand it, the shortfall in '27 is around $4 million. The dollar store, we bought it for 7.3 or up to 8. The number keeps getting kicked around, so I'm not sure what the actual number is. But it's like twice the problem. So that if we can dump that we can push the problem off for another year.
Yeah.
Because it's not an instant solution that goes away and never comes back.
No, that's true. And it won't fill the whole gap, but the other thing I'm sure you've thought about is right now while we own the dollar store, city property, it's not generating any tax revenue. It's our own property.
That too, yeah.
So again, it won't fill the gap, but I've really been thinking about how if we once we move it off of our rolls and it's privately owned, it does begin generating some level of tax
It
revenue.
generates some tax revenue,
Yeah.
which is not going to solve the problem.
It will not, but everything we can do to
it's-
shift, like you said, it's going to be a series of decisions, large and small, I think,
Yeah,
that
so
are going to make the difference.
So every little bit either helps or hurts.
I agree.
So it's going to be a challenging year. And we get into some of these other issues too that, one of the big drivers is going to be the school system. And they took some significant cuts as a result of the settlement of the teachers' strike. And one of the concerns I have is that, they're going to hire all those people back again. And basically, the performance of the school system is not that great. On the SAT levels, they're making maybe 50% of the kids are meeting minimum levels on SAT scores. So there's significant room for improvement. And I guess the issue that bothers me is that if we're going to go back and spend the money to do the same thing we're doing before, how are we going to get some improvement in the system? And the other big bite that bothers me is that Beverly was rated 215, Beverly High School was rated 215 out of 239 high schools in the state for STEM. And STEM, is my estimation, is getting to be even more significant than it used to be. So there needs to be some adjustment in the program. And how is that going to affect the budget? So there's a lot of ingredients, and I recognize that the city council technically doesn't do the budget for the school system, but at the same time, you've got to approve it.
Sure.
And you have to have some knowledge and some background to say, well, what's going to be spent is really good money, or is that really going to help? So how do you get this kind of background, I guess?
Yeah, one of the things that I really look forward to and have appreciated, but I appreciate and look forward to doing with this incoming school committee and our new superintendent is really starting to have some of those conversations together earlier. We typically do have a joint meeting before the budget process for the city council really gets rolling, but of course the school budget process gets rolling ahead of ours in earnest. I mean, in some ways, of course, it's already going, as you and I talked about.
Yeah.
The end of the last budget cycle effectively launches you right into the next.
Yeah, you start all over again.
You start all over again, and our financial forecasting process that helps us do a look forward is a piece of that process. But one of the things we talked a lot about during the last budget cycle, and especially around the school budget, both so that educators, families, parents, and residents of the city have more insight, but also so that the city council gets some of, I think, the look that you're talking about, particularly if for counselors who don't have children in the schools, you don't have quite the same window. I have a 9th grader right now at Beverly High School, so sometimes I don't. That does not mean I know everything that's happening, but I do get a window into some of the excellent educators that we've got, what's happening in the classroom, where he's engaged, where his peers are engaged. But we talked a lot about doing sort of looking at a needs-based budget that maybe just puts on the table, here's all the things that we wish we could do, and then really does a more transparent job of publicly talking about, but we had to reduce X this year because we couldn't afford it, but here's the plan to do it.
Yeah.
And here's, that's happening, that's part of the budget process, but one of the things that came up in the conversations over the last year was that sometimes that was happening ahead of the public piece of the budget process, to get the budget to a more publicly presented document, and would there not be a benefit to really having all of us understand together, our full needs are X, and here's why we've had to reduce in these areas, and here's the plan to get there. And I think that addresses some of what you're talking about, because some of those full needs would be these longer term goals that that educators are pointing to, that classroom staff are pointing to, that our superintendent is pointing to, that we need to be able to get to these milestones and these markers. And so what will be the plan to get there, even if it can't be this year? I think all of us understanding that together would go a long way towards both our planning and our feeling really good about how we're investing in our schools and moving forward together.
Yeah, and I think that the whole idea of laying this stuff out in public in details and start to put priorities on things. This we got to do. That would be nice to do. And if we had a little bit of extra, we could do this too.
Yes.
I mean, this kind of a discussion, I think, needs to take place, especially if we get to the stage of we need an override. And what are you going to do with the money? It's going to be a big question in everybody's mind.
Sure.
And without some detailed information of, well, this is why we need it, this is what we're going to do with it,
Yeah.
a lot of people say, not on my budget.
Yeah.
I can't afford another, because the other half of the game is overrides are forever. Once you put it into the budget base, it's there for good. There's no way to get the thing out again conveniently. So it's a long-term decision, not just a one-shot deal.
Yes. Yeah, and I think you're very right to say that public education and public conversation so that people can feel like they're making an informed decision about any of the decisions that we share. But if we do come to the point that there's an override on the ballot, you're absolutely right. I really believe that a big piece of that will be having those conversations leading up to it so people can make an informed vote, whichever way they vote, right? Because one of the things I keep thinking about an override question is it gives us data we don't have right now, one way or the other. So if voters in Beverly were to decide that they were inclined to pass it, if we had those conversations, if people could understand where the money was going to be spent and effectively said, okay, that makes sense, and the majority of us are going to vote to have that happen, then that gives us not only revenue, but information we don't have, which is that folks feel inclined to support that. I've said from the beginning when we've started talking about is this something Beverly needs to consider, that putting it to voters, to me, is a worthwhile endeavor, because if voters decide that they're not going to vote for it, it also tells us something we don't know right now. Right now, either way that all of us are guessing that it might go, we're all guessing. And so having real information about what voters feel inclined to support or where they want to place their money or how they want to lean into that or not, then gives us data that we would need to continue to figure out, okay, what are the other levers? How are we going to manage the budget, not just for FY27, but beyond? And so, I think that conversation ahead of time together is hugely important. Not sending people out, any of us, without the information we need to make our own decision.
Yeah. And the last time we tried an override in the city, it didn't make.
No, overrides are a challenge, and you're not wrong to point to that, and especially for cities. Just historically in Massachusetts, we often see neighbors in towns pass overrides. Towns and cities are arranged, they are governed differently, and so for lots of reasons, we're more familiar, I think, seeing our neighbors in towns potentially pass overrides. It's a challenge for cities. Historically, it's not been done as regularly. More cities now are, just like Beverly, I think a lot of municipalities are thinking about all of these different ways to meet needs, because one thing that I guess is cold comfort is that we're not alone as a municipality in facing a particularly challenging year. It's just, we're obligated, I believe, as a city council, as a school committee, as a mayor's administration, our concern has to be to do the best we can for the people of Beverly and figure this out.
And finances are tight all over the place, so hoping for a windfall from the state or from the federal government, slim to none.
That's part of the problem for sure.
So there's no saving source of money that's going to suddenly rain the helicopter money down on top of people.
Unfortunately not.
Yeah. So, and everybody's in the same boat that their budgets are getting tighter, and they don't have an option of getting an override on your salary or your pension.
That's very true.
So that it gets to be a very difficult decision that do we really want to spend this extra money? And I keep coming back to the point of what are we getting for it? What's the benefit to me?
Yeah. And I think that will be part of the public conversation has to be, helping people understand what would be the benefit and then letting people decide.
Yeah. Part of the problem is going to be that the benefit to me is nothing personal. My street isn't going to get repaved. My sidewalks are not going to get repoured. And I don't have any kids in the school system or some other thing. So it's the benefit to me is, well, I'm meeting my obligations to support the city. That gets to be kind of tough to sell. If it was an issue that we're going to start repaving more sidewalks, I could use some of that help because my sidewalks are a little bit like a roller coaster ride. Not as bad as it was, but it used to be funny to watch the kids come down because there was a gap in the sidewalk.
I remember actually where you're talking about.
And the kids would love to come down and woo!
Like a little jump.
Yeah, a jump. And it got to be somewhat strange that the city came in and put these yellow ramps at the intersection, so at the handicap ramps.
Yes. Yep.
And so, okay, somebody handicapped gets up there, it comes down the sidewalk, there's
Oh,
no
and then
warning
there's a
of,
huge,
yeah.
yeah. No,
So
you're right. You're right. There
So
are
there
those
are some
areas.
things
Yeah.
that need to be done, no doubt about it. And it's not a matter of just getting around to it. It's a matter of can you finance it? So
Right.
it keeps coming back. But I think a lot of this has to be brought out. And I think this is one of the things that came out as a result of the escapade over the library, that the city council and the taxpayers need to know in advance what's coming, why it's coming, and why it's coming, I think, is the major ingredient.
Yes.
It- So hopefully we can get to the point where the administration provides a lot more detail of what's behind all these things. Because like you get into the issue of, okay, we're going to borrow some money to build or do a major overhaul on the city hall. Oh, that's nice. We're going to float a bond. That's nice. We got to pay bond premiums every year.
Yep.
How much is that going to be? What's that do to our problem? And I think this is the kind of detail that we're going to have to start getting into, because we're going to have to make a tough sell on an override, or we're not going to do some things that people want to get done because they're going to want to know the because.
Sure. And I think you're right to say that, because I have thought, since I've been on the council, one of the things that's been important to me, and I think is important for people in the city, is trying to offer that because, trying to offer more information rather than less, trying to communicate really fully. It doesn't mean maybe that every single person wants every piece of information, but my sense has always been that giving people more insight and information helps people to understand, as you said, helps people to understand maybe why some of the things happen the way they happen, even if maybe it wouldn't be everyone's first choice. And sometimes also allows us to decide in the end, it's not a thing that we're going to do, or it's not a thing that residents largely are supportive of. So I definitely think having that why and having those conversations publicly is really important. And I think we've been improving in that area. The city council, I know you and I have talked about, this last council iteration, we really worked to ask that the administration come more regularly to give these regular updates on city projects. That's happening. I think you're going to see that continue to happen, and even potentially more regularly. And I think that's all forward progress.
Yeah.
And is important. And so I hope we can continue to deepen our ability to share that information, because the why of things, as you said, doesn't always mean that everybody will agree. But my sense is, as a person, we always feel better when we understand why something's happening, rather than if something gets just dumped on us.
Yeah, so that keeps coming back to the establishment of priorities. All these things are nice to do.
Yes.
And differentiating between nice to do and we got to get this done makes a difference. And I think there needs to be an explanation of why it's moving up in the priority list, other than, well, it's nicer to do than that. I mean, these kind of details really have to come out. And it sounds like at times it gets to be kind of boring. Oh, yeah, here we go again. But you got to get to the point of being able to make an intelligent decision. And that intelligent decision is going to have to come right down to the voters if we get to an override stage. So that, I think, is got to be a major ingredient in anything going forward, that City Hall meeting with the City Council, where somebody gets up and just expounds on some theory, is nice, but behind it, you've got to have the background of what's the details. And I think it really depends upon the administration to come forward with, this is what we want to do, this is what it's going to cost, and this is why.
Yes.
And this is what the priority has to be because, or this is nice to do if we got a few extra bucks laying around. And we get into that situation every year, It's called free cash. That at the end of the year, there's free cash that we can spend. And so there is a want list in somebody's back pocket that says, oh yeah, now that we got the money, let's do, yeah, and when we get to that situation, because as you mentioned, this is going to be a year after year
Yes.
challenge, do we really want to spend the free cash on something that's not high on the list when we can see a problem coming next year? Should we save the free cash to help defray some of the budget costs for the next year? So that gets to be another ingredient in the game.
It definitely does. And you're right to say that some of the free cash, that is always part of the equation. Some of the free cash doesn't need to be invested or saved in a different area. And then when there are things on the list, that are those other kinds of hoped for needs when money comes, we've tried as a city to use free cash to tackle some of the things on that list that are like a one-time purchase.
Yeah.
Because, as you and I have talked about, free cash is not something that you can, it's what's sort of left over unspent, right? I know you've been really good about saying it's not really money that just appears. It's money that was budgeted that's not been spent. So you don't want to roll it into a year-over-year expense. Free cash has not become a great way to fund a salary because, right? But so we do have some of those expenditures. A new fire truck is one that we've used free cash for. Things that's a real and present need. It serves a critical service in the city, and once it's bought, and it's an investment that we've got for the life of that fire truck. So the free cash can be really helpful in tackling some of those kind of expenditures. But you're right that it's still really trying to make those informed decisions. Which ones are the highest needs? Which one can we afford right now?
Yeah.
And knowing that it's an expense that can be taken care of with that free cash that we have this year in hand, and not rolling it into a year-over-year expense where we might come up short the next time because the free cash isn't there or it comes in lower.
Yeah. So it's going to be a challenging season, and I wish you the best of luck. And
Thank you.
as we get going forward, it's going to have to have more discussions about this and what the details are. So I'd like to invite you back again sometime.
I was just going to say, we'll just keep the conversation going. It's
Yep.
it's an important piece.
And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching us this evening. And if you've got any comments, my email address is in the credits before and after. And if you've got a longer comment to make, there's room for you here at the table. And again, thanks for watching, and stay tuned. It's going to be interesting.